On this episode, we are talking about 1999's American Pie, and we are going to see how it holds up to 2021 standards. We're going to be talking about memories, trivia, and much more. I'm Captain Nostalgia, and this is the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. Hide the baked goods. Jim's here. The show starts right now. I feel like I should start this podcast by saying no pies had coitus with them while we recorded this. Just in case, pie people are listening, just know. No pie was harmed.
We need that disclaimer. Is there... Do we suspect that that's a demographic that listens? Do we have pie enthusiasts?
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't put it past someone. I'm not trying to kink shame anyone. Like, if that's where you're at, go for it. I just think that, maybe this movie inspired someone to try that for the first time.
I had never thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Somebody walked out of the movie theater in 1999 and said, I got to try that. I want to talk to that person. If you're that person, please DM me on Twitter and let's talk about this. I want to know your story. I want to know where your journey has led you.
That is DRock 6499 for anyone listening.
Yeah. Oh, man. Thanks for remembering that. Man, you're a true friend. Look at that. I was doing a test the other day. I think if you... DRock64 is just like my username, and I'm pretty sure if you just search that, I should come up there. So I can just start saying DRock64 to make it a bit easier.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember Spike TV way back when used to have this TV show called 1,000 Ways to Die.
That was one of my favor's shows.
Okay,
in my teenage years.
So you know about it. So there was this. There was like this. I guess it's a myth, but there's a legend that if you stick a cow heart and hook it up to a car battery, it's supposed to give the real feeling of vaginal sex. And guy turned it up very low, and then he was like, oh, well, if it feels good on the lowest setting, it must feel amazing on the highest setting. Needless to say, that's where his story ended. But I am curious to know if, in all seriousness, if, anyone is actually out there listening might have had their way with baked goods.
Yeah, like Josh said, no judgment here. I'm one of the most sex-positive people I know, maybe two. Sex positive in some cases, so definitely something to keep in mind. Also, I feel like not that this needs a disclaimer, but we are talking American Pie. This movie is R-rated. There's gonna be dropping some language, some descriptors that we maybe haven't done, at least not while I've been on so far. So just be prepared for that. But we are talking American Pie, a movie in which Jason Biggs fucks a pie. So that's just, what you're getting into up front. So just, be aware of that. Maybe don't listen in the car with the kids. Save this for your morning jog with your headphones in.
So what is I guess before we kind of get started with this, we should probably preface why we picked this movie. It just seems so random. But every month, Dan and I, we get together and we're picking a theme of a movie that we want you guys to pick for us, and you had come up with this idea of doing comedies from the late 90s, early 2000s that might not have aged as well, or might be offensive by today's standards, and we pitted four titans into the ring. It was Freddy Got Fingered, Malibu's Most Wanted, American Pie, and what was the last pick we did? Euro Trip.
I think, Euro Trip was on there.
And American Pie won, hands down.
You guys made some good choices. I want to revisit all of those movies. First of all, Euro Trip especially. I remember laughing so hard when I saw that movie in theaters, and I just really, really want to revisit it and see how it has aged.
Well, it's interesting to watch movies like that you grew up on and see if it's still like where you are in life, if that comedy still hits you the same way. I was really bummed. Out of the poll, Freddy Got Fingered, which has been a episode I've been wanting to do for a while because I love Tom Green. It just was like lowest of the low. I think it had 3% of the votes. That was it.
Oh man!
So thanks for the two of you guys that voted for Freddy Got Fingered. But I recently picked it up on VHS and rewatched it, and I was like, this movie. Very offensive, and I had actually never seen American Pie. For some reason, I've seen all the spin-offs, but I've never seen the original one.
Wow, and did you see any of the main sequels, like 2 or American Wedding?
I saw the second one. By the time American Wedding came out, like I was just kind of like over that like sex comedy in like portion of like my viewing and my cinephile story. I was just kind of like over sex comedies by that time.
Yeah, I tend to just find them more distracting than anything when there's just a lot of naked bodies on the screen. That's hard for me to focus on anything other than that. But you have one thing I noticed, because I went through and we watched American Pie, American Pie 2, American Wedding, and American Reunion, which I had not seen at all before. That came out in 2012. And what I did notice is that these movies kind of mature with their audiences a little bit. It's still American Pie. You're still going to get dick jokes and everything else, but the character development, especially by the time they're like actual adults in American Wedding and American Reunion, it's a little bit better, and you're seeing more of like a moral compass there with some of the decisions that are being made, which was nice to see. And I got to give credit to the writers and the actors portraying these characters. That is cool to see over the course of these 4 films that were made over the course of a decade, longer than that. But the original American Pie, I don't know like what the state of the American psyche was. This movie came out July 9th, 1999. So we're in the Clinton administration. The Monica Lewinsky scandal has gone out and is out there in the land. It's a wild time. People are probably paranoid about Y2K. And here comes along this teen comedy that I just don't know if the world was ready for. But it immediately became this phenomenon. And as a kid, so I would have been 8 years old when this movie came out, and I just remember it being like the pinnacle of like, you're not allowed to watch this. Like it is, It is a college adult film. It's not okay. And I didn't see it for a few years. I ended up watching it in the early 2000s when I was in like 6th grade, I think, which still may have been too young, but I thought it was like the funniest thing I had ever seen. And I just fell in love with this movie. So that being said, rewatching it now as a 29-year-old, almost turning 30 in a couple of weeks person, it's I still think it's really funny, and I'm more forgiving of it for some of its more just like disrespectful parts of it. But I am able to critique it and say, it's really not okay that a plot point in this movie is having Nadia, filming her secretly, taking her clothes off, and then accidentally emailing that to the entire school, which at least that was accidental. But at that point, is 300 people really worse than 3 people? I mean, you're still showcasing it without her being aware of it. And it's kind of unclear, or at least, no, it's not unclear. I mean, she finds out and she knows in later movies, but she never talks about it. She's never like, Jim, you shouldn't have done that. That was a bad thing. Like, it's just so brushed over, and you never really see the consequences of it.
Yeah, I guess for me, being now 30 and being really removed from my sex comedy days and being married for 7 years and being with the same person for 10, like I had a different viewing experience, because I don't know if you ever watched this, but when I was living at home, Comedy Central used to run the direct-to-video sequels for this movie, like just around the clock, late night. That was pretty much their thing, and so I was getting off at like 1 or 2 in the morning and not, being able to sleep, so I would just watch American Pie, and so that's kind of how largely, and they would air them unedited, so I watched a lot of that stuff growing up when I was like 18 and 19, and then I just kind of fell out of it. It was never a subgenre that I really wanted to follow. And to your point about it, being kind of not prepared American-wise, it's interesting because the 80s were full of sex comedies, and then they kind of fizzled out, and we weren't seeing anything, because like the 80s had like Revenge of the Nerds, it had Porky's, and it had so many other iconic ones that by the time of the 90s, I'm surprised, for as weird of a time as the 90s was, we didn't get more sex comedies before 1999. And then it kind of kicked off this like almost like 10-year romance with the idea, because we had so many other sex comedies that came as a response to how big of a deal American Pie ended up being. And so I don't have that same experience that you do. My parents, as I've said on here, were pretty strict on what we were allowed to watch growing up. It was very much the pinnacle of, you are not allowed to watch this. And so by the time that I was able to watch it, I just didn't have a desire to watch it. But I don't regret it. But I have some trivia if you would like to hear some things that could have made this movie just a little bit different.
I would love to hear that. And just to give you an idea of where my mindset was, the first time I watched these movies, I actually bought them, or rather my mom bought them for me. We walked into a Blockbuster together. That's the point in history where this was. We were at a Blockbuster and I saw them, and my mom was either incredibly irresponsible or the coolest mom in the world. Still not really sure. But I was like, Mom, these movies seem really funny. Like, I'm mature enough. Like, I want to see them. And so she let me buy them, let me watch them. And that, was maybe a turning point for me in growing up. But yeah, Blockbuster, what a good time that was. But tell me some trivia.
All right, so you want to take a guess as who the studio's original choice for Jim, or their top choice, was?
Oh, I actually remember reading this, and I forget which actor it was, but I know it was someone big and someone surprising. But I have no idea who it could be.
Well, he won't be home for Christmas because his father died in The Lion King while doing Home Improvement, because it was Jonathan Taylor Thomas, which is, again, hugely surprising. Like, I just could never picture a wholesome person like Jonathan Taylor Thomas playing Jim.
Yeah, that would have been a totally different kind of movie with him. I kind of want to have seen him try it, though. That could have been a cool acting challenge for him.
And he would not have been fathered by Eugene Levy, because Bill Murray was actually considered for the role before Levy.
Okay, as much as I love Bill Murray, Eugene Levy was the perfect choice for Jim's dad. And he's the through line in every movie, including the spinoffs, and he is the best part of any of these films. Every time he's on screen, it's just my favorite moments.
All right, can we just get into Eugene Levy real quick, because Eugene Levy was and is my favorite part of this movie. I mean, just some of the dialogue and the conversations that him and Jim have, whether it is a father introducing his son to porn for the first time, or kind of having the birds and bees talk and the differences between all the magazines, and then also at the same time, seeing him walk in while he's making love to a pie.
Yeah.
Some of the best moments in here, and I came across another fun fact. A lot of that dialogue was pretty much improvised. The directors and the writers basically were like, hey, this is the scenario of what's going to happen between you and Jim. Just go with whatever feels natural. And some of the funniest moments of that movie come from him.
He's so great, and I know him from being in American Pie. Of course, he's become huge more recently for Schitt's Creek, which is a phenomenal show. And it's so cool seeing the juxtaposition being in that show, playing a character with his son, played by his real-life son, Dan Levy, and kind of seeing that relationship and the difference between this fictional one with him and Jim in American Pie. But Eugene Levy I feel like he was born to be a dad. Like he's the most understanding person in this film series. Whatever he catches Jim doing, no matter what, from making love to an apple pie in American Pie 1 to super gluing his hand to his dick in American Pie 2, to he shaves his groin area, Jim does in American Wedding, to which Eugene Levy says pubic hair just wasn't a problem when I was dating, wasn't a big deal. He just tries to break down every awkward situation, which Jason Biggs is Jim. I mean, what kind of bad luck does that guy have? He just seems to get himself into these awful, embarrassing situations over and over and over again. And I don't know if I should feel bad for him or if he's just an idiot and he gets himself into them. I don't know.
Well, it's funny. So when I was watching this, American Pie 2 started right afterwards, and I let it roll through probably the first 5 to 10 minutes of that movie. And just the opening with Jim and his dad is priceless, where he walks in on his son having sex. And he's trying to educate and talk and be sincere throughout the entire thing, and then the girl's dad walks in and he's trying to make it this very wholesome thing, and he's like, oh, that's your daughter. I'm Jim. I'm Jim's dad. And I love his energy so much, and I felt like I really related to some of the scenes that him and his dad had, because my dad and I have also had those really awkward moments as well. And so when he's when he walks into the room with all the magazines, I was like, man, this scene feels like it hits a little bit closer to home than it probably should.
It's and also in American Pie 2, when he walks into the college dorm and Jim and the girl are having sex, and the father walks in and he says, oh, that must be your daughter. I didn't get her name, but hopefully my son did.
Yeah.
There's so many just good moments where he plays it so straight and just tries to make the best of just these awful situations. Even in the beginning of the first one, when Jim is watching porn and his mom and his dad walk in, and his dad's trying to get the channel to change, he's not able to, the remote's not working. He is I feel like Eugene Levy now is known as this incredible actor, and I know he's been active for so long now. So to have American Pie kind of be this thing, it almost feels like I feel like a lot of people know him because of American Pie, but when you look at his greater filmography, he's done so many other things, and it's very clear how talented he is. And yet to have this big iconic teen comedy, but have this actual adult man be one of the best parts of it, I think it really goes to show that how impressive it is, because I don't know any other actor who could have brought the kind of energy that Eugene Levy brought to it.
Yeah, I feel like even if this film had gotten Bill Murray, it wouldn't have been the same, or if you would have had like another kind of dad archetype play it. I think Levy being able to improvise the way that he does really makes this a special performance, and the fact that, like you had mentioned before, like that he is the through line for not only these sequels but also the spin-offs, which they are still now making to this day. I think they just had one come out last year. But it's interesting that they went with him, and he just makes it work. Like, I don't feel like it would have had the same heart if you had had any other thing. Because one of the things that really, I feel like personally, and I guess we can get into it, is the main premise of this movie. I mean, I don't know how your high school experience was, but I had a little bit more grace than to make pacts with people to say, I'm going to lose my virginity by prom. Like, that to me, just by today's standards, feels like a very 90s thing to do. But I feel like, you know, Levy really gravitates and anchors this film into some heart, which a lot of sex comedies, I feel like, are just void of.
He definitely does, and you bring up a good point that the whole premise of this movie is a group of 4 friends making a pact to lose their virginity before they graduate. And I don't think that has necessarily aged well with the way that just the world has come, how, you know, people seem to be better educated now, just better humans in general, that it's like, you know, it's not the very concept of virginity, I hope, is viewed a little differently now. You know, we've had movements against slut shaming. We've had movements against sexual harassment. There's been a lot of progress has been made. There's a lot of progress to be made. But this movie definitely came in at an age where that wasn't a consideration necessarily. And I think that's one of the problematic parts of it, especially when you want to look at things like diversity and social issues. At the end of the day, it's a movie about 4 very white friends living in a very white suburb in Michigan, as saying, hey, you know, we haven't had sex yet. This is bad. We need to fix this, and we don't really care what ends up with the girls that we end up picking. We just need to do it before we go to college. Now, where I will defend this movie is that there is some form of moral epiphany that happens, particularly with Oz Stryker. Oz's character, he's my favorite one in this group. He's the only one that seems to genuinely care. He doesn't want to pull one over, at least not on purpose. And he's the one that kind of comes to his senses the quickest with, hey, this pact actually isn't cool that we did this, and I'm really falling for this girl that I was trying to get with. I need to be honest with her if I hope to have any kind of relationship, which is ultimately what he wants moving forward.
It's like that scene in The Wedding Singer where they're in the bar and Robbie's just found out that Julia is going to marry Glenn, despite him being, you know, a adulterer, basically. And he's like, his best friend's a womanizer, and he's like, man, I'm just so lonely. Like, I just want someone to hold me and tell me everything's all right. And I loved it that was the arc that Oz had throughout the course of this movie. And to your point, just a quick aside about, you know, this being a movie about 4 white guys, that the franchise has never really moved away from that. Like, that's always been a core of the franchise. And it's just now with this most recent one, I think it's called Girls Rule, if I remember correctly. But it's the first time that they have ever kind of allowed another point of view to take place that wasn't a white male. Now it's white girls. I mean, it's a step in the right direction, but I mean, still, there's not a whole lot of diversity that this franchise has really gone through, and they know who they're targeting as their demographic. That's neither here nor there, but I do agree with you. I think that Oz really has the most beautiful of these arcs, and I just don't ever remember having high school experiences where that was the one thing that I was focused on. There's a scene between Kevin and Tara Reid's character where she's what does she say? She's oh, it's always about sex. And he's oh, it's not just about sex. And I'm kind of curious, did you ever have the high school experience where it's everything that you did, every girl you dated, you're just gotta get into her pants?
Not necessarily. This is where it can be complicated, because I need to really break down what am I remembering and what have I built up in my head versus the reality of what happened. Because I'm sure if you were to talk to any of my ex-girlfriends, you might hear oh, no, he was just sex crazed, never wanted to do anything else. But no, I mean, it was a physical, I won't even say sex because I didn't do that for a very long time, but any form of a physical relationship was important to me from a fairly young age. And I think that there was a lot of chemical things in my brain, in my body, things I didn't understand, feelings I didn't understand, and didn't know how to process healthily. So it wasn't to the extent that's displayed in this movie, where it's I'm graduating, gotta get laid, gotta find a girl. But there was the emotional aspect that I want fulfilled, but that absolutely in my brain always equated to a physical aspect as well, which was just as important. And at the time when you're 16, 17 years old, your brain is not functioning at 100%, and you're not always making the best decisions for yourself, and particularly for other people. So I think that there's definitely that's more of what my experience was like. And looking back on this, I think it would be easy to say it's oh, I regret this. I shouldn't have said this, shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, I am judging the actions of a 17 and 18-year-old with a 29-year-old brain. And that is also not helpful, because you learn, you grow, et cetera, et cetera. But with this movie, it does not equate to my experience, particularly the parties. I never really went to very many high school parties. I don't know if you did often, but definitely not the ones that were like this. My parties were drama club parties with soda and snacks and playing Never Have I Ever in someone's basement. That was really the extent of it. It was never just these drinking, crazy times, people going off to bedrooms. Never really occurred, at least as far as I was aware.
No, I got invited to one or two parties in my high school, and I was going to one because it was in walking distance of where I was, and I ended up getting violently sick. And apparently Monday morning it was revealed that two kids got caught walking out of the house with 240s.
Wow.
And a cop just happened to roll by and the party got busted up. So I was never really there. I dated a ton in high school, and I was very shallow and very sexually driven. I would probably, out of everyone in the course of this movie, I'd probably say that I identified to Kevin probably the most, because I was always with a girl, and I was always trying to see how could I get this situation to benefit me. And I did that for about the first 3 years in high school, and then I went through. When I finally got serious about a girl, basically some things happened, and she cheated on me, and I had to face that reality, and that reality led me to contemplate suicide on and off. And I dated very casually over the next year or so, and then ultimately ended up kind of stepping away from dating. So my dating story in high school is very weird and unique. But yeah, I probably would say that I feel like I identify to Kevin more than anyone else here, because I was always just very shallow. Even when the scene at the end where the prom breaks up and you have all of these guys, whether you're talking about Finch, Jim, Oz, and Kevin. Kevin's really the only one that wants to stay afloat with the pact, and man, I've come a long way. I will say that.
Yeah, and my memory of this movie is that Kevin is the only one who succeeds, but that's not true, because Jim succeeds. Eddie K. Thomas as Finch succeeds famously with Stifler's mom, and Oz, we don't know definitively. So every time I've watched this movie, I've always assumed, they, him and Heather, they don't have sex. They just spend all night together. They have a good time. But now I'm not so sure. I think they might have. What's your theory on that? Because rewatching it, I think they might have, and he's just doing the gentlemanly thing of like, well, I'm not going to tell.
That's what I thought. I thought that they had slept together and he was just kind of being a gentleman. Because when you first meet Oz in the course of this movie, he is nicknamed Nova after Casanova.
Can I just say, my fiance and I did a drinking game to this movie, which was a terrible idea. And I came up with the rules myself. And one of them was anytime a character is referred to by a nickname. And that alone almost killed me. So I don't recommend using my drinking game rules.
Well, I think one of the very first scenes that we get to see of him in action was where so this film, very early in the movie, it's probably like the first act. It's all Stifler's party. And the idea is basically Oz is going to skip the party to date a college girl, and there's just this like very awkward tension between them, and so he breaks it by just saying "suck me beautiful." And I've never seen this movie. I thought I misheard the movie, and so I rewinded it, and I was like, nope, I definitely heard that right. But he comes a long way throughout the course of this movie.
He does. His character development is maybe my favorite. Many of the guys in this film, Stifler especially, you could classify them from a mental health perspective of OCSB, out of control sexual behavior. Literally, they do not feel in control of their own urges, and it ends up hurting people, and you see real world ramifications of these actions happening, whether it's broadcasting a girl undressing on the internet without her knowing, or lying to a girl and making them think you're something you're not, just being driven by this one goal. And it's not we know it's not a good thing. We know it's not the end all be all, and we know that there needs to be a level of maturity with it. I give this movie a bit of a pass, not only because of the day and the age, but also I think the role models and the age in which these characters grew up, which they were children in the 80s and the early 90s. They didn't have as much just exposure to the more mentally healthy side of sex and sexual display, and so there's not really anything there for them to have a healthy basis for. Which of course leads to all kinds of problems, and why sex is something that needs to be taught better and discussed better from an earlier age, and not something that you just try to sweep away and ignore when it comes up. It's something that people should have a better understanding of, and understand their own feelings and their own thoughts, and know what they're doing Otherwise, you're going to get people on one end of the spectrum, like these four characters in this film, and then others who feel overly shamed based on their urges and their thoughts. And there needs to be a healthy discourse there to be able to sort through those issues. And that's what I think this movie is lacking, with the exception of Eugene Levy, who tries to have those conversations with Jim. But I don't think any of the other characters really have that person, except for Kevin does have his brother, who's played by Casey Affleck, which I completely forgot. And his cameo in this movie is definitely one of my favorites.
Oh man, I love seeing Casey Affleck in this movie. I've really become a Casey fan over the last few years. Just with a lot of his indie work has been phenomenal. But to your point, I couldn't agree more. And I think that growing up, I had this very unhealthy relationship with the subject of sex because of those surroundings, where we grew up probably in two different environments, where I was very much around the church, and I was very much in around religious circumstances. And it's always, purity is something that's always like is taught very heavily in church circles, because the Bible talks about how a man and a woman should like wait till the wedding night or whatever, but after that, like, sex is always kind of like almost like shamed, I guess, for like lack of a better word. And so like I had the public school systems in one corner, talking about how basic sex is, and just kind of talking about like the basic urges, about how your body's changing and functioning, but not really telling anything what to do with it. And then you have this forbidden fruit over here in the church, and so you turn to I turned to things like pornography and using women as shallow as possible to get, to discover what sex was. And I think a large portion of that is because we do treat sexual education the way that we treat mental health. We try and teach it as basic as we can, and we have this fear of going deep with it. And so you have a culture of shame that is built up around it because we're not explaining it properly. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now, and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I really hope that we see a change in that. And the public school system doesn't do a very good job. I can't imagine what the Catholic school system does. there needs to be more openness here, and I'm hoping in the modern day, especially as students are being able to stand up for things that they believe are right. We're seeing the whole movement with students against things like gun violence and other issues that are important to them. There is much more connectivity, especially over social media now. So you're getting this connection, which can both be good and bad, that the students at American Pie in 1999 just didn't have. But one of the things that this movie did was it helped launch Seann William Scott as Stifler to just new heights in his career. And he's done a number of things over the past couple of decades, and he's shown some decent range as an actor. And he didn't want to be pigeonholed in as that Stifler character. But what are your opinions on Stifler? And maybe if you haven't seen some of the later movies, you don't get to see some of the redemption that he gets. But there is, he is just solely driven by sex, solely driven by partying. He has no empathy for the people around him. And they keep him around and they're friends with him, but they also kind of hate him at the same time. And I feel like people who have never seen this movie know Stifler. They know that character. And he's just become such a pop culture icon, which is funny because he's not one of our four main characters. And especially in the first movie, he really is kind of on the sidelines for the most of it, unless we're at a party he's hosting, or maybe he's, just in a scene to give commentary. But he's not a massive part of this movie to the extent that you think he would be.
Yeah, so I grew up with Seann William Scott in other roles like Bulletproof Monk and the Rundown.
First of all, phenomenal movie, The Rundown. So good. I'm so happy you mentioned Bulletproof Monk. I saw that movie in theaters for my birthday the year it came out, and anytime I mention it, no one has any idea what I'm talking about.
Maybe.
And I only saw it once, close to 20 years ago now, but I remember really enjoying it. It was such a fun premise.
I freaking love that movie. And I've seen Seann William Scott do other roles throughout his career, whether it has been dramatic or it has been even in the horror realm. And getting to kind of see him at Ground Zero is really interesting because it's been years since I've seen any of the the mainstream sequels, so I don't honestly know how his character goes, but he just kind of plays and comes across as the archetype of horny high schooler that we've seen 1,000 other times. He just kind of seems like white noise for the genre, and kind of because I feel like every movie that's within the genre, you're always going to have a tertiary character that is going to fill that role, and that's what Stifler feels like to me.
Mm-hmm. Definitely fair. I like his development, particularly through American Wedding and even American Reunion. He gets more of that moral compass, and he just starts to think a little bit more about other people and less about his own dick and his own motivations. But it's in the first movie, he's there to throw the parties. He puts the laxatives in Finch's cappuccino. He also coins one of my favorite nicknames, Shipbreak, which he calls Finch. And yeah, his attitude through this movie, and some of his lines are delivered just so straight, like when Oz is talking about why he joined choir, and he says, this is an untapped resource. It's just like that college chick told me. All you got to do is ask girls questions and listen to what they have to say and shit. And Seann William Scott just goes, I don't know, man, that sounds like a lot of work. And it's played off as comedy, and it is very funny, but there's genuinely probably teenage boys out there who agree with that. Oh, that sounds like a lot of work. What do you mean I have to listen to the words they say? Which is sad, but that's why I like this movie. I prefer this movie to be used more as a tool to teach that if someone who is high school age or younger today wants to see this movie, I'm not going to say no, don't watch it. It's inappropriate. It's not good. It victimizes people. What I would do is watch it and then have that discourse and say, well, look, this movie came out in this time. This is what the movie does well and some of the lessons that we can learn here, and this is what it doesn't do too well and what you shouldn't emulate in your own life. And I think if more pop culture is approached that way, as using it as a tool, as something to learn from and not something that either gets removed or just swept under the rug, I feel like we, just as people and as consumers, will be able to benefit and grow more from that, and just kind of move forward and be able to grow and learn from there. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of people who say, no, American Pie is garbage. It disrespects women. It's an awful role model for teen boys, and no one should ever see it. And I totally understand that point of view. I just happen to disagree with it, because even though it does have those negative stereotypes in there and definitely doesn't benefit from these kids using their brains, it's a good jumping off point for saying, don't do this stuff. And if you are tempted or thinking about doing it, here's why you shouldn't. And people have feelings, and those feelings are valid and they're important. And in this movie, toward the end, feelings are considered, but not as much throughout the decisions that are being made.
I'm so glad that you kind of took that idea and broadened it to all of pop culture. I think that the idea of canceling culture because it was released at a different time in our history where something that is currently unsocially acceptable was socially acceptable back then, and just sweeping it under the rug and saying, oh, we're going to cancel this because of X, Y, and Z. That is not learning from anything. And one of the things that I shared this in the Jennifer's Body episode, but one of the podcasts I've been listening to recently has been Empty Inside, and I honestly, it's become one of my favorite podcasts, and I love the fact that the entire premise of the podcast is having uncomfortable conversations so we can grow as a culture. And I think that while this film is littered with just things that you would never fly today, things that would be immediately canceled, use this as growth. Like, this is how we grow. We don't cancel and sweep it under the rug. Like you're saying, like, we sit down, we watch it, and we have a discord about how we can grow and how we can learn from the mistakes of the past, because if we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, then history is bound to repeat itself.
Absolutely. And there's a difference I want to point out of learning and understanding from the past and glorifying and honoring it. And this is, it's a whole other podcast we can do about social issues we're seeing today between issues with Confederate general statues and whether or not they should be removed, and things that are taken down. Dr. Seuss recently decided to stop printing several books that did not hold up to today's standards. And there's, I think, each case, case by case, you need to look at each thing, but you want to be able to remember and learn about the past, but it shouldn't always be glorified or honored. And that is something that you need to remember. There's the reason that you have the 9/11 memorial to memorialize and remember, and then the 9/11 museum to serve as a catalog for what happened that day. Exact reason why in the museum you see the names and the histories of the hijackers. You do not see those on the memorial. It is two very separate things. There is keeping a catalog of history and of what happened, and then the actual memorial piece to serve as an honoring of victims. And I think that if we can best separate those things, just in general, it will be more helpful. Of course, this is speaking about very broad, very serious topics. We're looking at war, we're looking at death, we're looking at attacks. When we're looking at pop culture and saying, okay, well, these movies, the ideas do not resonate well today, I agree basically what you said, Josh, is, let's not remove them or make them inaccessible, but let's use it as a talking point and make it as something that we can learn from. I think Disney has done a very good job at adding disclaimers to some of their older animated films. It's one of the reasons why I'm a proponent for them bringing Song of the South to Disney Plus and putting a disclaimer there. I don't think they ever will. I am honestly surprised that for years one of their biggest rides in Walt Disney World has been Splash Mountain, which is just a love letter to that film, and yet they try to deny it even exists. However, that is being changed out now. I forget which movie they are adapting it to. It's one of the newer 3D films, but they are going to be re-changing that and giving it a facelift as well. Very long rant on my end, but the point being, when it comes to, films, shows, even things that show stuff that is shameful today, people should still be able to have access to it, but have it with that conversation of, okay, yeah, like this really wasn't okay. Here's why it's not okay, but don't just wipe it off the face of the earth and make it so that people can't access it anymore.
I agree with you 100%. And nowadays, everything's on the internet. So, you say something and it's here forever. But I wanted to bring this, back to a myth about this movie. I love this fact that I found on IMDb. Contrary to popular belief, this film did not actually invent the term MILF. A 1995 Usenet post initially used the anagram, predating the movie by 4 years. However, this movie is largely credited as being the one to significantly popularize the term.
And Jennifer Coolidge is Stifler's mom. I mean, there was never a better choice for that casting. And I love her role, and she's phenomenal. And you know what line went completely over my head that I didn't notice was a joke until this last watch through? It's when she's talking with Finch, and Finch goes, where's the liquor? Where's the good stuff? And she goes, I got some scotch in the drawer, aged 18 years, the way I like it. I never noticed. She's talking about 18-year-old boys, but she was.
Oh, I got some more trivia for you, though.
All right.
On that note, Jennifer Coolidge. No, I don't have anything about Jennifer Coolidge. Great choice for that character. So this movie, it's interesting. John Cho was actually he's credited twice in this movie, and it ties into the MILF scene. He is kind of the teenager at the party that actually initiates the conversation of MILF and tells everyone what it is, and then he ends up making out with a picture of Stifler's mom, which was weird. But he is credited as MILF guy, and he is also in the Vocal Jazz Club, and he was 26 when this movie shot, the oldest cast member for this movie.
That's incredible. And he went on to have a great career of his own. That's cool that he is credited twice, though. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the internet is a wonderful thing if you know how to use it. I also want to talk about this soundtrack, man. I did not realize how much punk and ska were in this, which was such a thing for the 90s. Like, you can tell that this film was made for teenagers that grew up in the 90s that were just kind of sick. And Blink-182 even makes an appearance in this movie, which I thought was so great.
Yeah, that was so funny when they come in. Yeah, the music in this movie, I mean, I was digging it. So many good hit songs of that time period, and definitely it's what you would hear, I imagine, if you went to a high school party in 1999. That's probably what they would be playing.
Yeah, I really, really did love the soundtrack. I kind of forgot about it initially, and then I wrote it down in my notes, and I was like, now I have to bump it tomorrow on my drive to work. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression, and to get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Absolutely. You got any other trivia for us?
I do, actually. Shortly after this movie, Shannon Elizabeth, who plays Nadia, did Playboy, and she calls it one of her biggest regrets to date, and she did Playboy as a way to not get typecast as her role of Nadia.
Interesting. That's too bad. I always I'm a big proponent of people doing what they want to do, what they're comfortable doing, what gives them confidence. And so to hear when someone does something like that and that they end up regretting it, that's definitely that's too bad. And I don't want anyone to ever have regrets over a decision like that. I do remember an interview, I think, with the director a long time ago now, but it was some behind-the-scenes stuff of American Pie. And they said when they were shooting her scenes in the room when she was stripping naked and everything, they said that she was very comfortable with that whole process. And they said that like the cinematographer and the director and the people on the set were more uncomfortable than she was, but she seemed to be, very natural and very comfortable just doing those scenes and working along. Whether or not that's true, that is coming from a male perspective and not from Shannon Elizabeth herself. But it's one of those things that I think that the film industry has maybe learned a bit from, that they're American Pie is kind of known for their gratuitous nudity, and I like to think that we don't see it quite as much. And when we are seeing it, it's important and needed for the film. This is slightly off topic, but I remember in an interview with Seth Rogen, he says that his strategy is whenever he needs a woman to be naked in one of his movies, he gets a porn star, because for them, asking them to get naked is the least worst thing that they could do. So it's very simple, relatively simple for them, given their job and what they typically need to do in front of a camera. So he tends to find people who have really pursued that type of work, then instead finding a different type of actress and asking, okay, can you take your clothes off and let's do this scene.
Interesting. And I fail really to consider another role with Shannon Elizabeth outside of 13 Ghosts. I can't think of any other thing outside of this movie and the series. And it's interesting because she doesn't have any regrets about specifically doing the nudity in this film, but she does in the for Playboy. But to your point as well about nudity in movies, I think that we've kind of reached this point as a culture where we don't want to feature nudity in it anymore. I think it's the reason you don't see comedies like American Pie, at least to the big screen capacity that you do. I can't Like Stuber is really the last time that I feel like we got like a comedy that had come out that was, you know, a hard R rating and didn't really perform the way that I think the studio was expecting it. And I think for the majority of it, movies like American Pie or just comedies in general, I've found more of a niche at services like Netflix or Hulu where they can just be streamed at any time.
Yeah, and you have with streaming services, I mean, Netflix, I feel like there is no rating there, so they're kind of free to do whatever they want for their service, and you do see a lot more. Not so much with comedy. I feel like Netflix, particularly, they'll do it with dramas, and there will be, you know, more intensive sex scenes than what you'll see on cable television, which can, you know, that's why I don't watch a ton of cable TV anymore. I do watch some. Nothing against it, but I do like the freedom that some of the streaming services tend to have. But I think American Pie, I mean, the legacy this movie left behind, I would think inspired some of the filmmakers that went on to do movies like Road Trip, Euro Trip. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Sex Drive. It came out in 2008.
I was going to bring that one up because there was, I don't know if what version you saw, but the unrated version, it had the directors come out right before and they were given this speech about how they hate it when movies were quote unquote unrated or were the director's cut, and there was like nothing that really took advantage of it. And so what they did was the film start out on just them, and it just slowly faded like out to like show their entire bodies, and they were just surrounded by like 100 naked dudes. And so you just have like random like penises and vaginas that would just like show up in that movie, and they really took advantage of that unrated.
Man, I don't think I saw that version of it, but now I want to revisit it because I probably haven't seen it since it came out. So that would be a good Friday night. Order some pizza and watch a good sex comedy from the late 2000s.
I think it's like the last sex comedy to come out. I think it came out like right on like the tail cusp of like when sex comedies were starting to kind of fade out. But yeah, I think it's streaming on Hulu if I remember correctly.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, that movie came out in 2008, so I don't know. Barack Obama came into office and just the world changed. People didn't want to put up with their American Pie sex comedies anymore, I guess. Though I feel like 2009 to 2012 was a kind of a strange time with movies and some of the content we got in those years as well. I was also in college during that time, so there was it was a fun time for movies in general.
Yeah, well, so this movie, it took 4 tries to get the R rating that we see. This movie, every time it went to the MPAA, it kept getting an NC-17 rating, which if you know anything about the NC-17 rating, it is like the mark of death. Showgirls remains the number 1 NC-17 movie of all time.
Wow, that I definitely did not know. You know what makes me so mad about censors and ratings like that?
You know what really grinds my gears?
Really grinds my gears. There was a moment. There was one of the game shows that Chris Hardwick used to host. He might still do it. I'm not sure. But something came up there, and I believe this clip is on YouTube. You can go find it. But there's a picture of a naked woman with a cat in front of her vaginal area, and he says, "You know what's interesting is that pussy is covering that pussy." And if my understanding of the censors is correct, only one of those got bleeped. And he is correct. Only the second one was bleeped. It's the same friggin' word.
Different context, man. Different context. And
and normally I'd say context matters, but come on. At what point are we just fooling ourselves?
Yeah, censorship is an interesting word. For years, I never understood why we censored the word shit on TV, and I never understood like GD. I never understood why God was always the one that got censored, but damn was allowed to stay.
You know what movie we should really revisit sometime? Came out the same year as American Pie, actually, is South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut.
That has been on my list for years to revisit, and now that I actually have, I think it's on Paramount Plus, but
nice.
I think we're starting to remember. But one last fact for you, and this just blew my mind. You ready for this?
Yeah.
So in Denmark, this movie received an A, which stands for Ollie, which translates in English to everybody. So this movie in Denmark was basically rated G.
What are they doing in Denmark? and should I move there? That's insane to me. But it's also it's funny. I have not been to Europe yet. I hope to at some point in the not too far future, once this pandemic is over. But my understanding is the perception of sex and nudity and humor like that is far more widely accepted than in the U.S. The U.S. Despite touting ourselves as the land of freedom and expression, we get really up in arms over things like the human body, which is not something I agree with. I don't like the fact that parents, first of all, make nudity as big of a deal as it is, but secondly, that you can go watch the bloodiest, most violent movie ever, see people actually get killed, but if there's one pair of boobs in it, nope, inappropriate, can't see it. That is not something I agree with. I do not want to live in a society where the human form is more shamed than actual mass murder. I'm not okay with that.
Here's the thing, too, about, to bring it back to censorship and the way that we process things as a culture, is that if a female has full frontal nudity in a movie, it's guaranteed to basically get an R rating. If a male does it, it is guaranteed to get a NC-17.
Yeah, and that's something that I would like there to be equality there. I do think, in fairness, if you're a filmmaker and you're going to do a film and there are going to be nude scenes in your film, you should have just as much male nudity as female nudity. I think that's only fair, and it should not be one-sided one way or the other. Now, in fairness, in American Pie, we do get Jason Biggs dancing in his boxers. So there's that. But what I'm saying is that if we were being really fair, those boxers probably should have come off.
Well, yes, I do agree with you, but it comes back to the culture of shame that we've built up around the idea of sex being this just awful thing, and it's not. I mean, it's a natural human function and desire, the same as breathing and farting. Like, why can't we just normalize sex? And it's like, we shame people for having different kinks than us. There are some people that only have sex simply to procreate, and that's fine. There are some people that like to have weird, sweaty, passionate, leather BDSM sex, and that's also fine. But we don't talk about it because we're raised around a culture of shame, and it all starts with the way that we interpret the human body and all of its form and its glory, and the fact that we basically say that a human cannot, under any circumstances, be naked without being censored because of the shame that comes with it.
Yeah, totally agreed. I hope we see some changes, hopefully in our lifetime, but, history in general is just constantly moving and marching forward. Progress will always need to be made. We will see where society ends up. I kind of thought the world was on the same page, and then the last 4 years happened, and I've discovered that that's not the case at all. And no one, especially in the United States, will ever agree on anything, as far as I can tell. But we can, keep pushing for a world that we want to see, that we want to live in, and we'll get a little bit closer each day.
We can keep trying. And I mean, I feel like as long as there's still like people like me and you that will, agree to disagree, but still like, respect one another and remain friends, then,
agree to disagree unless what we're disagreeing on disrespects somebody else's existence. Like that's
same.
Pretty simple, I think. And I wish more people would understand that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of bloody violence, on our next episode, we're going to be talking about Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. But Dan, we mentioned it earlier in the show. Where can people find you online if they have baked good stories?
You can reach me over at drock64. Please tell me your tales if you have any experience with that. I would love to hear them. And also, if you want to read any of the stuff I write, I am over at Tech Raptor as well. I'm currently working on an anniversary piece for the 20th anniversary of Animal Crossing. So, if you're a big Animal Crossing fan, keep an eye out for that.
Did not realize that was 20 years old already.
Yeah, man. Time is a construct, and it's not real.
Well, you guys can find me on Letterboxd to follow my film journey. It's at Captain Nostalgia, and you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net to find all of our stuff, including our main feed of podcasts, all of our social media, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also have 2 spin-off podcasts. You guys can check out the Hourglass Cinema and That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast, movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. So until next time, remember to hide the baked goods and head for Camp Crystal Lake, because we're talking Jason Lives on the next Victims and Villains. Have a good one, guys.